Story time about how my date broke into my house and tried to choke me. Disclaimer, is not my story time. I sent me on Instagram. 2 years ago, I signed up to Hinge. I matched with a really cute guy. Lived in my city, drove an expensive car, and was looking for fun. At the time, I was not looking for a relationship. I just wanted to have some fun. It was lust at first sight. We were both attracted to each other and he couldn't keep his hands off me. Now, I did like this, but he was taking it a little bit far. We're sitting at a booth and had some drinks. This is when he kissed me. He did not ask me for permission and he put his hand on my thigh. I let him do it because I knew I was having fun. Then he started inviting himself over to my apartment. I told him that I was definitely not comfortable with him coming over. He made a joke about following me home and coming in and doing whatever he wanted to me. I laughed it off but was creeped out. I told him I got gassy and that I needed to go home. What was about to happen was terrifying. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my date broke into my house and tried to choke me. Disclaimers are not my story time. Sent me on Instagram. I lied and told him that I was getting gassy and I needed to go home. We say goodbye in the restaurant and he walks me to my car. I drive off and I check if he's following me. No, he wasn't. As soon as I get home, I decide to order pizza because I was still hungry. I actually was not gassy. While I'm waiting for the pizza to arrive, I run a bath and put my music on as loud as possible. By the way, I live alone and my house is pretty big. I decide to take a quick shower to take my makeup off, and 5 minutes into my shower, my phone starts to ring. It's my date. He says, "Are you sure you don't want me to come over? You look lonely." I told him, "How do you know what I look like?" Then he says, "Just send me your address." I did not. I hung up and blocked him right away. I get out of the shower and I hear the doorbell ring. When I open the door, nobody is there. What happens next is terrifying. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my date broke into my house and tried to choke me. I open my front door and nobody is there. Remember, I thought it was the pizza guy. I look closer, and that's when I see a dark figure standing in the corner. Can you imagine how scary that is? My knees instantly started to shake, and that's when I realized it was my date. I told him if he left now, I wouldn't call the cops. Then he runs at me while taking off his belt, puts the belt around my neck and starts squeezing so hard. Almost immediately passed out. I was wearing a bathrobe. He ripped it off of me. Then he said the creepiest thing. "I want to see what you look like passed out." Then the doorbell rings. It's the pizza guy. He finally lets go and tells me that he'll be back. I run outside and the pizza guy stays with me until the cops come. Unfortunately, the police never found him. He obviously lied about his name. I'm afraid he's gonna come back for me. What should I do? My ex-boyfriend is threatening to expose our SEX tape if I don't get back with him. Disclaimer is not my story time. I've sent me on Instagram. I broke up with my ex 3 months ago, and it's become my personal nightmare. We actually only dated for 6 months on and off. At the time, I didn't know it, but he was definitely love bombing me from the beginning. At the time, I didn't even know what that was. Not until I started watching TikTok. We met at a bar, which is the worst place to meet a guy, by the way. He was all over me the first night he met me. He was trying to kiss my neck, and he even tried to grab my butt. I told him he needed to calm down, and he did. The following week, he managed to get a hold of my friend on Instagram, and he convinced my friend to give him my number. And my stupid-ass friend gave it to him. He was extremely manipulative, too. I later found out that my friend had a crush on him, so she was just trying to give him my number so she had an excuse to talk to him. Once this man got my number, it was a constant barrage of text messages. He would text me every single morning. He would send me selfies, and all of this without my permission. I've only dated broke guys in the past, and my ex has a lot of money. So I decided to go out with him just to get a free dinner. Biggest mistake of my life. He forced a kiss on me on our first date. Part 2 is up. He actually forced me to kiss him on our first date. Story time about how my ex is threatening to expose our SEX tape if I don't get back with him. Disclaimer is not my story time. Instead of my Instagram. After he forced me to kiss him, I slapped him and he liked it. He actually said, "I'd like that." I know this sounds terrible, but I kinda liked it. So then I went on a second date with him. He was really quick to do the dirty. He would always be grabbing or touching me. Anytime we were alone, even if it was for 5 seconds, this man would just pounce on me. He was literally and utterly obsessed with SEX. Don't get me wrong, it definitely was overwhelming, but I had never been with somebody who was so passionate. But then came the jealousy. He was constantly worried about who I was with. He was always showing up to places where I told him I'd be. Even if I was having dinner with friends, this man would show up. He would show up uninvited to my house. Before I knew it, 5 months had passed. This is when my parents started trying to convince me to break up with him. They hated that he always came around to the house even when we were all having dinner. He would just show up and sit down with us. My father especially hated him. He would also grab me in front of my parents and try to do stuff. Part 3 is up. In front of my parents, he would always try to kiss me and touch me. My father hated this guy. Story time about how my ex is threatening to expose our SEX tape if I don't get back with him. One night I go over to his apartment, which he lives in a penthouse, and he tells me that he has something fun planned for us. I went into his bedroom and he had this whole setup. Cameras, chains tied to the bed, handcuffs. It was like 365 days in there, or 50 Shades of Grey. This man knew how to get me to do whatever he wanted. He started kissing my neck and we started doing it. I knew the camera was there, but it didn't bother me. I never thought that he would ever try to use it against me. Fast forward 3 weeks later, I break up with him. He decides to start stalking me and then sends me the video. He told me he'd give it to me if I went to his apartment. I go to his apartment and he basically attacks me. Pushes me down on the couch and tries to do it with me. Then he told me that if I didn't get back with him, he'd expose me. I got back with him. He's on his best behavior. What should I do? My husband demands I show him my coochie so that he can check me for STDs every single week. Disclaimer is not my story time, is sending me on Instagram. Okay, my husband and I have been married for 2 years. Here's a little background info. My husband is like a 6 at best. I'm like a 10. Everywhere we go, I get male attention. I'm always getting looked at or stared at, no matter what I'm wearing, okay? I could be wearing a sweatsuit and people still notice me. My husband claims to never get jealous, but every time I get male attention, he starts saying things like, oh, you look too pretty today. Every now and then he starts complaining about my jewelry or my makeup. A little more background info. When we first got married 2 years ago, we decided to have an open relationship. This was mostly for me because I wasn't as attracted to him as I wanted to be, so sexy time was kind of boring. I would have to literally picture other people in my mind in order to feel anything. And he knew all of this. I actually told him that I wasn't as attracted to him as I wanted to be. After a year, he didn't want to have the open relationship, so I agreed. But then this made him get jealous. Part 2 is up. My husband demands I show him my coochie so that he can check me for STDs every single week. Disclaimer is not my story time, I'm sending me on Instagram. After he told me that he didn't want the open relationship anymore, I agreed. But then this made him become extremely jealous and toxic. Every single Saturday I had brunch with my friends, my girlfriends. This meant no men allowed. After we stopped the open relationship, he started asking me if he could come with me to brunch. And of course I'd be like, no. Then he started insisting on going everywhere with me. He became more controlling about the way that I dressed. Even if I wore a little bit too much perfume, he would start saying things like, girl, you're trying to get attention, you need to stop trying so hard. This obviously became a huge problem for us. And this was like 2 weeks after we stopped the open relationship. When I confronted him about it, he told me that he didn't trust me, that I was too good looking, and that men were still trying to get with me. I told him that as long as he wasn't comfortable with the open relationship, that I would never want to do that again. Then he started asking me if I thought about other men. The worst part is he started checking all the messages I sent the guys that I was hooking up with when we were having an open relationship with. This made him even more insecure, because these guys were really good looking and my husband just isn't. Part 3 is up. My husband demands I show him my coochie so that he can check me for STDs. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sending me on Instagram. His insecurity kept growing day by day. One day I come home from hanging out with my girlfriends and he says, pull your panties down. I thought he was just trying to like hook up with me. So I did it. He then spreads my legs, grabs his flashlight, and starts checking me. Not just on the outside, literally putting his fingers inside and checking. He even tasted and smelled his fingers. Then he took a picture and notes. I asked him why he was doing that and he said, I'm gonna start checking you every single week. Then he said, put your underwear back on. I felt extremely violated. Then I told him to never touch me like that again. Then he said, I'll take your credit card away if you don't behave. I was shooketh. Like I said in part 1, I'm treated like a queen. He's always paid for everything and we live in a really beautiful house. I'm not about to lose that kind of life. Since then, he's been checking me once a week. So I decided to start cheating. I'm not gonna let him get away with that. And I'm not gonna get an STD because I'm not stupid. And guess what? My husband barely touches me. He could have just left us having an open relationship and none of this would have happened. I don't want to live like this and I don't want to get a divorce. How can I convince him to have an open relationship again? What should I do? Cheated on my husband over 20 times and I don't bother hiding it because I secretly hate him. Disclaimer is not my story time, it's on me on Instagram. My husband is the biggest vagina in the world. Here's a little backstory. He and I met 5 years ago, and as soon as we met, I was the one that was interested in him. Which drives me crazy now, the fact that I chased this man. Disgusting. All I did was ask him out on a date and he said yes. After that, he fell in love with me and I did too. Within the first couple of months of our relationship, I realized that he was extremely sensitive. This man would cry a lot, and his feelings would get hurt very easily. So I basically had to start walking on eggshells to make sure I wouldn't offend him. For example, I once did my own laundry and I didn't do his. Number 1, he was really upset, and number 2, he started crying because he said that I didn't love him enough. His mood swings were all over the place. And then the worst part, he got fired from his job and basically didn't bother looking for another one. He told me that he wanted to live off of his savings for the next couple of years. This man never wanted to pay for anything. If we went out to dinner with his friends, he would never offer to pay for my dinner. His friends would pay for my dinner. I was so beyond embarrassed. I was footing the bill for everything. He barely paid me rent. Part 2 is up. Cheated on my husband over 20 times and I don't bother hiding it because I secretly hate him. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's on Instagram. So aside from him not ever paying for anything and fully expecting me to pay for things, I began to hate him. You might ask me why I married him. He comes from a really rich family, so I thought he would eventually ask his parents for money. But no, he did not. Before I knew it, 3 years had passed. And like I said, he is such a big vagina. He always cries about everything. He was always in a bad mood. He was always getting sick. It got to the point where I couldn't even be around him because every time I was, all he would do was complain about what he was feeling that day. He always had a headache or his back hurt. And so he would ask me to do things for him. I was constantly having to give him massages, was always going to buy him medicine. This man would wake me up at 3 in the morning and go ask me to buy stuff. I was literally taking care of my child. Oh, and let's talk about our sex life. It was boring. He always did the exact same thing, never wanted to try anything new, and basically always complained about having to do things to me because it pained him. So I was completely unsatisfied, like all the time. I began hating him more and more every day. Even the sound of his voice triggers me. You might ask me, do I love him? I do. I care about him, but I'm not in love with him. Part 3 is up. Cheated on my husband over 20 times and I don't bother hiding it because I secretly hate him. Disclaimer is not my story time, it's sending me on Instagram. After realizing that I was living with the man-child who made me do everything for him, who cried all the time, who was always so sensitive and always needed something, and complained 24/7, I decided to start cheating. A few years ago, I had met a guy through a coworker. We always followed each other on Instagram and I knew that he was attracted to me. And he's pretty hot. And rich and good looking. So I decided to reach out on Instagram and asked him if he wanted to go out. Not only did he say yes, he planned a whole outing. We went hiking and we went to get massages. Then he took me out to dinner. And then we went to his place and had amazing sex. I would see this guy about 3 times a week. Then I started hooking up with another guy that I met at the gym. This guy was really hot, but he didn't have a lot of money, so we never really went out. It was just plain sex, but it was good. About 6 months later, I met another guy. Again, amazing sex. Do you think my husband noticed anything? No. I would talk to these guys on the phone while my husband was in the same room. I would be setting up dates with these guys in the same room as my husband. Do you think he cared? No. I would even wear sexy outfits to go out with them and he never asked anything. He would just say, have fun, and then he would call me to complain about what he was feeling and what he wanted me to buy. Am I terrible for doing this? I lost my virginity before marriage and my parents want me to prove my virginity to them. What should I do? Come from an extremely religious family. In my culture, women should be virgins before they get married. So here's how I lost my virginity. To my cousin. My parents are super strict. I grew up hiding everything from my parents. When I was 14, this new girl came to my school and she basically corrupted me. I had never in my life before even kissed a boy or even looked at one. But she would take me to parties and this is where I started meeting a lot of boys. A boy asked me to be his girlfriend and I said yes. This is where I had my first kiss. The next summer, my parents took me to visit my uncles. This is where I saw my cousin. We were both exactly the same age, and as soon as we saw each other, we were pretty much attracted to each other. I know, it's really disgusting and messed up. I was 15 at the time. This meant I didn't know anything about anything. My cousin would flirt with me all the time while we were visiting, and it kind of became a game for us. Before I knew it, he got me alone in a room and decided to kiss me. And after this, we just started making out all the time when we were alone. Then he started touching me. Now, no, I did not give him permission, but we were both 15, and it was just understood that we wanted it. And then we did the dirty. Like all night. Part 2 is up. I lost my virginity before marriage and my parents want me to prove that I'm a virgin. And I lost my virginity to my cousin. So the first time I did it with my cousin, we did it all night. This was the first time I had ever done anything like that. At the time, I didn't think that I would ever have to then prove to my parents that I was a virgin years later. So after I lost my virginity with my cousin, everything went downhill. I started doing it with other boys. And I even started dating a boy behind my parents' back. My parents, like I said, are super strict. When I was 17, my dad decided to tell me that he had already offered my hand in marriage to somebody. So that meant I was promised to somebody I had never even met. The boy that I was promised to lived in a different country. So 4 months later, he came with his parents. And when I met him, I was in love. He was extremely good looking, super smart, and he liked me right away. We were both really compatible in every single way. But then I remembered that I wasn't a virgin. The first night we met them, my parents brought up the fact that I was a virgin. My fiance looked at me with the biggest smile on his face. Not me sitting there knowing that I had already done it with 7 guys. From here on, I had to pretend like I was the perfect little virgin. So I basically cut off all the guys I was doing it with. Part 3 is up. I lost my virginity before marriage and now I have to prove that I'm a virgin to my parents. So after I lost my virginity to my cousin, I was screwed. My father promised my hand in marriage to a man who thought I was a virgin, and his parents celebrated the fact that I was a virgin. Anytime they came to dinner, we would always somehow end up talking about how I was a virgin. It was like the hot topic with my father and his dad. This is when the wheel started turning. I started thinking of ways to tell my family that I was no longer a virgin. And the only thing that I could come up with was telling them that I was R-worded. But that's obviously a horrible idea because then I would have to accuse somebody and it would just be bad. So I decided to just simply confess. I sat my parents down and I told them that I was no longer a virgin. But when they asked me with who, I could not tell them it was my cousin. Instead, I told them it was some random boy from school. That's when my father told me that I had to prove myself a virgin to get married. So I decided to go to a gynecologist and pay him to say that I was still intact. All he did was sign some piece of paper that said I was basically a virgin. So I gave it to my parents and they were happy with that. So guess what I did on my wedding night to pretend like I was a virgin? I saved some period blood. Part 4 is up. I had to pretend I was a virgin on my wedding night, and this is what I did. I saved some period blood from my last period. Since my father had promised me to a man that I had never met, who I did fall in love with, but I wasn't a virgin and was promised as a virgin, I had to do something. The wedding was absolutely beautiful, and my new husband and I were getting to know each other so well. So I knew that I did not want to disappoint him because he thought that I was a virgin. So when it came time to getting naked and actually doing it, I was already used to it, so I pretended like it hurt really bad when he put it in. Frozen my period blood in a Ziploc baggie, and I put it behind the bed underneath my pillow. So as soon as we finished, I had already scooped some blood into my hand and I just went ahead and rubbed it on. And it worked. He saw the blood, kissed me, and then we did it again. At this point, I just enjoyed it. No one will ever know this secret, and my husband thinks that I've only been his. So I guess it's a happy ending, right? Boyfriend tricked me into having sex with his twin brother. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, it's on my Instagram. My boyfriend is the most obnoxious man I've ever met. We started dating 3 months ago. When I met him, I really wasn't into him at all. I met him through friends, and when we would all hang out, he was always the loudest one. He was always making the most inappropriate jokes and was always seeking attention from everyone else. I'm the complete opposite. I like to listen to people speak. I never raise my voice and I don't try to be obnoxiously loud. So I thought he was the biggest piece of shit when I met him. I couldn't relate at all to him. Then he came up to me at a party and started talking to me. That's when I found out that we had a lot of things in common. One of the things that we kept talking about was role playing. I'm into role playing, but I like to keep it safe. Whereas he likes to do some crazy stuff. He's into things like rape fantasies. I told him I was not interested in that, but we kept seeing each other through friends. Finally, after about a month, he asked me out on a date and I said yes. At this point, I knew that he was loud and obnoxious, but he was funny and made me laugh all the time. And I love a guy that can make me laugh. On our first date, he sent his twin brother as a joke. I thought it was hilarious that I confused them. Part 2. My boyfriend tricked me into having sex with his twin brother. Disclaimer, is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. That's when he made his twin brother go to our first date as a joke. Obviously, I didn't even know he was a twin. So when this guy shows up to the restaurant, I'm like, oh hey. 15 minutes into the date, he starts laughing maniacally. That's when my real date comes out of the bathroom, and they both start pointing and laughing at me. That's when I understood what was going on. My real date sent his twin brother. Here's the thing. They look exactly the same. They even have the same moles in the same places. Same exact haircut, and they even have the same tattoo on their necks. And they're both really hot. Their bodies are sculpted to a T, and their faces look like Greek gods. Finally, his brother left, and it was just me and my date. We hit it off and had a great time. Everything was really rushed though. A week later, he asked me to be his girlfriend and I didn't know what to say. He begged me for about 3 days. When I finally said yes, I told him that it was on a trial basis. That's when odd things started happening. He once again started sending his brother on dates with me. After I'd get home from a date, he would text me to say, how's my brother? I kept falling for it. Part 3 is my boyfriend tricked me into having sex with his twin brother. Disclaimer, is not my story time. It's sent to me on Instagram. I finally asked my boyfriend to stop sending his brother on dates with me. He said that it was just too funny and that they both thought it was hilarious. So I asked him if he was getting off on the idea of me and his brother together. Then he said, why? Would you like that? And I said, of course not. I like you, not your brother. Then he said, but we're exactly the same. Then he says, what if you already did it with my brother and you just don't know it? It actually took me a minute to think about it. I mean, how could I know? They both look exactly the same. At this point, I had given my boyfriend a key to my apartment. Big mistake. Later on that night, I'm dead asleep in bed. I hear my door open and I see that it's my boyfriend. Or at least who I thought was my boyfriend. He climbs into my bed and we have sex. I'm half asleep, but I was still open to it. The next morning, he's gone. I call my boyfriend and ask him why he left. Then he says, what are you talking about? I was never in your apartment. I literally could have shat my bed. Then he said, you actually fell for it? That wasn't me, that was my brother. That's when he asked me if I would be open to a relationship with the two of them. Apparently, his brother is obsessed with me. What should I do? Accidentally broke my husband's penis and now he wants to divorce me. Disclaimer, is not my story time. It's on my Instagram. My husband and I have been married for 5 years. He's in the army, so he travels a lot for work. Most of the time, I'm home alone. And because of this, every time he comes home, I want to be with him. You know, like, do the dirty. But this man tries to avoid it. Now, when we first got married, we lived together for about a year. Everything was, I guess, normal. I've always been the one trying to initiate, but he never really does. So back then, it wasn't like a weird thing. But now that he travels so much for work, I would assume that he would want to have sex with me. And therefore, he would initiate. Every time he comes home from traveling, all he does is lock himself in his office and try to play video games. He says that he needs to escape and that he really doesn't want to face his responsibilities when he comes home. So I'm left to do everything for him when he gets home. Like, I even have to set out his clothes on the bed, I have to make and serve all his meals, and I still have a 9-to-5 job. So I'm pretty much working year round. And I've even started paying for the bills because he asked me to. So the least he could do is treat me right and give me some sex. When I brought it up to him, he got mad. Part 2 is broke my husband's penis and now he wants to divorce me. Disclaimer, is not my story time. It's on my Instagram. So after I brought it up that he never wants to have sex with me, he got furious. He told me that I was always breathing down his neck, that the happiest time in his life is when he's at work in the army. Now my husband's never been the super affectionate type, but he's never been like that. So I asked him again why he's being so distant and cold. He told me that I was being too clingy and that after years of marriage, I should have been over him. Over him? So I asked him if he was over me. He looks me straight in the eyes and says, well, it's kind of hard to be attracted to you when you're not in good shape. My husband's in the army, so as you can imagine, he is in very good shape. He's got an 8-pack and is pure muscle. But I didn't know it was a requirement to be in really good shape to be married to him. When he saw the look on my face, he quickly apologized and said that he was just upset. I asked him what was going on at work and he told me that he was just having a hard time. Then I asked him if he was interested in someone at work. Of course he said no though. He told me that I was being too sensitive. So I asked him, fine, have sex with me right now. Part 3 is up. Accidentally broke my husband's penis and now he wants to divorce me. Disclaimer is not my story time with me on Instagram. So I demanded the sex. I mean, I needed proof that he at least still loved me. So he takes off his pants and we start going at it. But he wasn't getting, And I tried. But the more I tried, the more he complained. Then he said it was hurting. So I just went ahead and tried to sit on it. And that's when we both heard a snap. He screamed in pain and immediately said, "You broke it." So we put on our clothes and headed to the ER. The doctor said that he had never seen anything like that before and that I really needed to be careful next time. So on top of my husband not giving it to me and me being totally sex deprived, the doctor's telling me that I need to be careful. My husband basically gave me the cold shoulder for 2 weeks. Then he told me that he was no longer attracted to me and that he wanted a divorce. Come to find out, he's gay. Not only is he gay, but he has a boyfriend. And he's been with this guy for over a year, while I'm working my ass off paying for the bills, doing everything for him. So he asked me to get a divorce, but how are we going to split all our money? So I said no. I refused to let him be happy with this man while he wasted my... I accidentally broke my husband's penis and now he wants to divorce me. Disclaimer is not my story time with me on Instagram. My husband and I have been married for 5 years. He's in the army, so he travels a lot for work. Most of the time, I'm home alone. And because of this, every time he comes home, I want to be with him. Do the dirty. But this man tries to avoid it. Now, when we first got married, we lived together for about a year. Everything was, I guess, normal. I've always been the one trying to initiate, but he never really does. So back then, it wasn't like a weird thing. But now that he travels so much for work, I would assume that he would want to have sex with me. And therefore, he would initiate. Every time he comes home from traveling, all he does is lock himself in his office and try to play video games. He says that he needs to escape and that he really doesn't want to face his responsibilities when he comes home. So I'm left to do everything for him when he gets home. I even have to set out his clothes on the bed, I have to make and serve all his meals, and I still have a 9-to-5 job. So I'm pretty much working year round. And I've even started paying for the bills because he asked me to. So the least he could do is treat me right and give me some sex. When I brought it up to him, he got mad. Part 2 is I broke my husband's penis and now he wants to divorce me. Disclaimer is not my story time, it's on my Instagram. So after I brought it up that he never wants to have sex with me, he got furious. He told me that I was always breathing down his neck, that the happiest time in his life is when he's at work in the army. Now my husband's never been the super affectionate type, but he's never been like that. So I asked him again why he's being so distant and cold. He told me that I was being too clingy, and that after years of marriage, I should have been over him. Over him? So I asked him if he was over me. He looks me straight in the eyes and says, "Well, it's kind of hard to be attracted to you when you're not in good shape." My husband's in the army, so as you can imagine, he is in very good shape. He's got an 8-pack and is pure muscle. But I didn't know it was a requirement to be in really good shape to be married to him. When he saw the look on my face, he quickly apologized and said that he was just upset. I asked him what was going on at work and he told me that he was just having a hard time. Then I asked him if he was interested in someone at work. Of course, he said no, though. He told me that I was being too sensitive. So I asked him, fine, have sex with me right now. Part 3 is up. I accidentally broke my husband's penis and now he wants to divorce me. Disclaimer is not my story time with me on Instagram. So I demanded the sex. I mean, I needed proof that he at least still loved me. So he takes off his pants and we start going at it. But he wasn't getting, And I tried. But the more I tried, the more he complained. Then he said it was hurting. So I just went ahead and tried to sit on it. And that's when we both heard a snap. He screamed in pain and immediately said, "You broke it." So we put on our clothes and headed to the ER. The doctor said that he had never seen anything like that before and that I really needed to be careful next time. So on top of my husband not giving it to me and me being totally sex deprived, the doctor's telling me that I need to be careful. My husband basically gave me the cold shoulder for 2 weeks. Then he told me that he was no longer attracted to me and that he wanted a divorce. Come to find out, he's gay. Not only is he gay, but he has a boyfriend. And he's been with this guy for over a year, while I'm working my ass off paying for the bills, doing everything for him. So he asked me to get a divorce, but how are we going to split all our money? So I said no. I refused to let him be happy with this man while he wasted my... Boyfriend wants to act out a rape fantasy on me? Is this normal? He confessed to me that he has rape fantasies last week. Here's some context about our relationship. I'm 34 and he's 47. We met at the gym 2 years ago and we're both really into fitness. He chased me for about 6 months before I said yes to even going on a date. But when I think about it now, I realize how aggressive he was with me all the time. Before I ever gave him consent to touch me, he did it. At the gym, he would always find excuses to be touching me. When I finally said yes to going on a date, first thing he did was kiss me without even asking me. And on our very first date, he insisted on having sex. But I kept saying no, and I even had to fight him off of me at one point. No, it's not like he was trying to rape me, but he kept putting his hands in places he shouldn't have. Here's the thing. I haven't had a relationship in over 10 years, so I guess I could say I'm a little bit out of practice. I justified all of his actions because I hadn't dated anybody in a long time. And I also was happy because he's so attracted to me he can't keep his hands off me. But he's become very obsessed and possessive with my body. And to be honest, sometimes I like it, but other times it's just too much. Always in my personal space space kissing me, touching me wherever he wants, without consent. Part 2 is up. Boyfriend wants to play out a rape fantasy on me. Is this normal? Because I haven't dated in over 10 years, him always touching me and fondling me without consent seemed normal. Up until this point, I haven't wanted to move in because I do like my personal space. Last week, he told me that we should move in together. Once again, I told him that I wanted my personal space and that I needed my own apartment. That's when he said, well, then maybe you can please me in some other way. I asked him how and he said, I have a rape fantasy that I want to do on you. He said this with a smile on his face too. He kissed me and threw me on the bed. I told him that I was not ready for anything like that and he said, let's just try it. That's when he pinned my arms above my head and started kissing me. First it was fine because he usually does that anyway. Then he became more aggressive and started using more force. And that's when he started ripping off all my clothes. Of course I stopped him, mostly because of my clothes though. I told him that I needed more time to accept something like that and that he needed to be patient with me. But he didn't stop. He threw me back onto the bed and started kissing me again. I actually had to physically remove myself from the room. Once I did, he apologized and said that he wouldn't do it again. But then he asked me to just read on the subject. He showed me a website and I read it. Apparently it's completely normal. Part 3 is up. My boyfriend wants to play out a rape fantasy on me. Is this normal? After he was on top of me and I got away, he told me that it was totally normal and he gave me a website to read. Basically said that rape fantasies are completely normal and that I shouldn't be freaked out by it. So my boyfriend went back to asking me again if we could do it. Of course I said no at the moment. I was completely freaked out since he had tried twice without my consent. After I said no for the third time, he still wanted to have sex and we did. But the whole time I could tell that he just wanted to get rough with me. He kept biting my shoulders and grabbing my neck. Now here's the thing. I could say yes to this rape fantasy, but I'm afraid of what he'll actually do to me. The website says you need to have a safe word. And when I explained that to him, he said, sure. This man is pure muscle and weighs twice as much as I do. What if he just gets so into it that he forgets it's actually a fantasy? And I'm also afraid of liking it. But I continue to follow my gut instinct and I keep saying no. He's still always all over me though. I don't think that'll ever go away. Does your boyfriend do this? Is it normal? My friends tell me that I should be grateful that he's so attracted to me and they think that I should go for it. I think I'll say yes and then make an update video. Wish me luck.